tonight is so important, that we've got Col Tom Gordon and Meet the Author tonight, is it's for the membership. It's to give something back. It's that educate, commemorate, and serve. And that's our mission here at the Marines Memorial. It's not just, oh, let's go up to the bar and drink happy hour. It's not let's just stay at one of the rooms. It's not just, this is a great place in San Francisco. It really is all about educate, commemorate, and serve, and the members. So it's not only the old membership, the Don Reeds of the 90s, but we've got 90 years old, but we've got these young Marines, those young veterans, those young service members, and it's about educate and commemorate and serve that next generation. So really do thank you for your support.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Meet the Author event. It is extremely good, as the General mentioned, to be back here together after several years of not being able to host these events, and thank you very much for coming out tonight. Tonight's Meet the Author event is with Col Tom Gordon, a 30-year Marine Corps veteran, currently serving, as the General mentioned, as the Commandant of Cadets at the Citadel in South Carolina. He's here to talk about a little bit about his book, Marine Maxims. The subtitle of this book is Putting Leadership Principles into Practice. But Tom is here to talk about something much more important than just the nuts and bolts of leadership, of which there are many books out there talking about different ways and techniques to get the team all on the same page. Tom's here tonight to talk to us about character. One of the things that defines military service is the amount of responsibility that is pushed down to some of the lowest levels. The military is an organization where junior enlisted people who society considers immature, 21, 20-year-olds in some cases, people not old enough to have graduated college, perhaps not old enough to buy a beer, are given responsibility to make life and death decisions in combat. This, men like Don over there and his many years ago, this is something particularly pronounced in the Marine Corps, which amongst all the services has the lowest percentage of its force as commissioned officers, and puts more responsibility on its enlisted members, and again, it's very junior enlisted members, sometimes on their first tour or their first enlistment, than any other service. And this then raises a question. How is it that the military is able to push, and the Marine Corps is able to push responsibility down to such a low level? How is it able to get these very young people to not only make decisions in combat, but make the right decisions? And the answer to that is what Tom is here to talk to us tonight about. It's about character. It's about principles such as honor, integrity, and giving people within the military service the tools, like I said, to make the right decision, not just make any sort of decision. And that's what Tom is here tonight to talk to us about. During Tom's 30-year career, he commanded armor units at the platoon, company, and battalion level. He served as a company commander at Marine Corps boot camp, providing leadership to Marine people who had been Marines for only a few days or a few weeks. He served as the director of the Command and General Staff School for the Marine Corps in Quantico, providing guidance to officers who had 10 years or more of service under their belt. And currently, as the Commandant at the Citadel, he's responsible for the development of more than 3,600 cadets. Additionally, one of my favorite excerpts from his career is that he once commanded a unit, which the name may make no sense to you, called Special MAGTF Black Sea. And this was a group that was providing instruction to foreign military members of a nation in Eastern Europe. You may have heard this nation, it was the Ukraine. And the people that he was responsible for teaching years ago are now on the front lines fighting against the Russian invasion. When Tom comes to us tonight, he comes to us not from the ivory tower, not just as an academic theorizing about leadership or character. Although if you read his book, you will see that he has done an immense amount of reading, an immense amount of thought on what all that means. Instead, he comes to us tonight as someone who has been spending a lifetime, his entire adult life, putting aspects such as leadership and character into practice where it counts the most. Ladies and gentlemen, Col Tom Gordon.
Well, that was quite an introduction. I'm sure I won't be able to live up to that. First and foremost, General Rocco, thank you so much for having Candace and I out here. This is a tremendous honor for us. I'm humbled that you had asked us to come out here and to be the first one to bring back, the Meet the Authors night. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room. Makes me a little off guard right now. I like to say, nothing ruins a good sea story like an eyewitness, and there are way too many eyewitnesses in the audience today. So there may be some truth-telling to be had up in the bar afterwards. But I wrote a book, And it's doing pretty well right now. It came out in November, and it's on its third reprint right now. So we're pretty excited about it. I just wanted to actually have something that I could pay forward at the end of my Marine Corps career. What I thought to do tonight, though, is just talk very briefly about how the book came about, kind of some of the thought processes behind it, the premise behind it. And then, I would like to, as Phillip said, kind of circle it back and talk a little bit about character and developing men and women of virtue and character and returning them back to society so they can be leaders in all walks of life. So I started actually writing this book, believe it or not, back in 1987. I had no idea that's what I was doing, but there's a couple of CID grads out there in the audience, and when I was at the Citadel, I was issued one of those ubiquitous green-covered notebooks. You know what I'm talking about, 5x8 notebooks. Well, that became one of my most prized possessions. It became my leadership journal. And how it would work was pretty simple. Whenever I worked for or in proximity, for a leader I truly respected, whatever attribute it was that that individual did that resonated with me, I took some time that evening, I just journaled it. I said, if I'm ever in charge, if I'm ever in command, I'm going to do that. Well, I have to tell you, after 30 years, it wasn't all unicorns, rainbows, and parades, right? I did work for my share fare of, let's just be polite, martinets. And whenever I worked for a real tool, what I would do is I'd take that same book, I'd flip it around, and I'd write in the back. I said, if I'm ever in command, I swear I'll never do that. Well, after about 18 years, the front of the book met the back of the book. And I guess I led a pretty charmed life or career at that point, because I had far more entries in the front of the book than I did in the back. But if I was to be honest, I probably learned a lot more from those entries in the back of the book. And I got picked up for command at that point. And I didn't know, well, what am I going to do with this? This was kind of a stream of consciousness. So I took that book and I spent some time and I outlined it out. And I turned it into a series of 2 PMEs, professional military educations. Now, for the officers in the room, kind of a boondoggle. But what I would do every year as the CO of 1st Tank Battalion was I took all my lieutenants twice a year on a PME. In August, we'd go to Vegas. All right? It was bold. It was bold. And in the winter, we'd go to Big Bear. And it was just my lieutenants and I. And we went through that outline. That outline eventually became Marine Maxims. Back then, my call sign was Mufasa, so it was Mufasa's Maxims, and there was no way Disney was giving me copyright on that. So we made it Marine Maxims. But again, I had no intention of publishing a book at that point. But I still continued to journal, and I was privileged at that point to go on and command at the 06 level. And as I mentioned, I continued to journal, but instead of journaling about some great leaders I was working for or around and saying, geez, I wish if I'm ever in command I'm going to do that, I actually spent all my time, just realizing what incredible battalion commanders and, company commanders I had, in the group. And I continued to journal. I said, geez, I wish I had done that, I wish I had done that. So we continued to journal and flush out the outline. And after 06 Command, I had the privilege of sitting on the Council on Foreign Relations for a year. And it was 2016 in New York City. An interesting time to be up in New York City. And part of your responsibilities when you're a fellow up there is they want you to write. So I started writing about Russian influence operations back in 2016. And I had an opportunity to do a lot of research while I was up there and had great access to the FBI, and I started to pull this thing together. And the election came around, and I was like, this is the third rail, and I have no interest on getting into this partisan political fray. So I just tabled that for another day, another century, and just kind of went back, and I said, I have the time, and at that point, the book just started to almost write itself. I just had that time, and I really enjoyed writing it. Pulling those 50 maxims that are in the book. Now, how these maxims are described, I'll tell you, really, they're irreducible minimums. All right? That's probably the best way to describe them. What I tried to do was find the taproot to leadership, right? I think we all can agree that leadership's not a process, but an art that needs to be refined. But there are some maxims. There are some laws. There are some truths. And so I try to distill them down into some tactical and practical lessons that would be, a leadership development plan for a lieutenant or a lieutenant colonel. But I wanted to make sure that these weren't just mine, right? A matter of fact, I have to preface, none of these are mine. They say that less than 1% of the population is capable of an original thought. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a proud member of the majority, right? When I was a young second lieutenant out there in 29 Palms, I was blessed to have some remarkable leaders, right? So the regimental commander at that time was Colonel Bedard. A guy by the name of Mattis, had, one of the neighboring battalions. Robert E. Lee had 3-7. He went on to take over TBS. A guy by the name of Neller was up there at 3rd LAI at that point. And my battalion commander was Major Tim Donovan. So there were a lot of entries that went into that book, as you can imagine. And when I came back as a company commander, I had the incredible privilege of being in a great tank battalion at that time. But the regimental commanders, again, was a guy by the name of Neller, right? So I was his tank company commander for quite a few operations, both at 29 Palms and overseas. And then a guy by the name of Sattler, some other remarkable leaders. And as I continued to grow, I was blessed to be surrounded by some remarkable leaders. And they're all in the book. And I tried my best to attribute, whenever I found these great leadership lessons, to the person that introduced it to me. But, the beauty about being a Marine in the Marine Corps, some of this is ubiquitous, right? Some of this stuff where you don't realize how blessed we are to be around such great leadership. And it's really difficult to attribute that. So, but they're maxims, and they should, I hopefully will see them the same way that I do, as that way. Where I had those entries in the back of the book, well, it wasn't my intent to malign anyone, right? Now, some of you all, whenever I give conversation talks like this, people are like, hey, Maxim, 44, is that so-and-so? And as a negative example. And we'll stay out of that. If you think you've been able to figure out who I'm talking about as a negative example to leadership, well, that's for you to decide. But again, not my intent to malign, just my intent to kind of grow and, again, to give back to the future generations. As I said, my job right now is at the Commandant at the Citadel. And after 30 years in the Marine Corps, they take you out back and shoot you. Valhalla looks an awful lot like Charleston, South Carolina. My wife Candace and I are so happy to be back and just doing what I absolutely love doing. And that's teaching leadership. So when you read the book and you go through it, they're all kind of organized into 14 different sections. The first 4 are kind of more on the philosophy side. The other ones are more tactical and practical. You really don't have to, if you're reading it as a self-help book, though, you're probably going to be disappointed. You really don't need to read past maxim number 2, that it's not about you, right? Leadership's all about being a servant, and servant leadership is about sacrifice. I think General Flynn said, the price of leadership is self-interest, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that, Phil and I, when we start talking about the character aspects of it. When it comes to my command philosophy, and it's maxim number 4, is do right and fear no man. Those that have purchased the book, that's what I did sign it in there. It's do not right and fear no man. Well, that was my command philosophy when I was down at Paris Island. That was my first command, down 1995 Echo Company. And I have actually used that same command philosophy for every command I have had throughout my Marine Corps career, and now holds true as the Commandant of Cadets down there at the Citadel. And if I could just unpack it really briefly so you understand where I'm coming from and kind of circle it back to character, is by do right and fear no man, what I meant by that was I expected us to do what we ought to do. Our actions would not be judged by situational ethics, but be held to account by an honor standard that transcended legal compliance and social norms. We lead with integrity no matter what. I like to say in the book, if you have integrity, that's all that matters. If you don't have integrity, that's all that matters. The fear no man thing, well, that wasn't intended to be bellicose. It was actually just my repudiation to, quite frankly, a lot of the leadership by fear and intimidation that I saw as a junior officer. What I wanted to do was focus, and I wanted to give confidence to my leaders that were working for me, that I trusted them. I like to say my job as the Commandant is to underwrite the risk of well-intentioned failure. I believe there is a warfighting imperative to my command philosophy, do right and fear no man. What I was trying to do was instill that disciplined initiative in my subordinates, the confidence to deviate, to know that, you know what, if they were trying to do the right thing and they screwed it up, I had their back. So that's what we're trying to instill right now. That's what we're trying to pass on. I hope you enjoy the book. You know, again, there's a lot of attributes in there that I could pass around and give credit to. Many of those folks are in this audience right now. But General Rocco, thank you again for bringing me out here. Really appreciate it.
So, Tom, in good Marine Corps fashion, I'm going to open up what I expect will be my hardest question to you, and it's one that I thought of as you were standing up there giving the story of your book. If some or many of your subordinates have been doing the same thing you were and keeping a leadership journal during your time in command, what's one thing you would have done that would have made you put yourself in the front of the book? What do you think was your best or most successful leadership? And what would have put you in the back for the book? Where do you think your greatest failure was in your time as command?
Wow, we went right to hard grounder to third. You know, I will tell you my greatest failure as a battalion commander, quite frankly, was not firing a company commander. It was not firing a company commander, and I know that probably sounds strange, but as I've mentioned, I have my command philosophy is a repudiation of toxic leadership, and I had a toxic company commander who was working for me, and the reason why I didn't fire him wasn't because I was feckless or didn't have the guts to do it. It was far worse than that. It was arrogance. I thought I could fix him. So I kept on going out, grabbing him, and he and I would go out for these long walks in the desert, and the Marines were so demoralized when I would bring him back. They were. And then, but I belonged in the back of the book because that problem was identified to me, right? And I failed to take proper action. So. And he was no longer the problem at that point. I was. Now, when I returned as a colonel commander, I was on the lookout for it. And I'll tell you, if you ever take over a unit, I'll give you the best. There's one maxim in there about knowing the right questions to ask, right? I like to say I don't have the answers, but I do know the questions. And my favorite question to ask whenever I took over a unit was, and it was always best presented to senior staff NCOs and warrant officers. But, Philip, what are you going to tell me that no one else is going to tell me? It's a great question. It immediately engenders trust, and it cuts right to it. And they pointed me on target onto a particular officer who was extremely toxic in the organization. I had a meeting with that individual, and it didn't go well. That first meeting didn't go well, and I said, this isn't going well. Why don't we table this conversation and circle back and have that conversation tomorrow morning? And I kind of questioned myself, like, why am I even waiting overnight on this thing? I said, but we're going to hold off. And that next morning I came in and I told him that he was moving on. He was no longer going to be in charge of that unit that he was in. And he was taken back by it, but I told him I was pretty confident I knew how that episode was going to end. And it actually was in his best interest to go and find a job that didn't involve working with people. So I give myself credit for being decisive on the front of the book right there. So thank you.
You have 50 maxims in your book, and while giving your speech, I noticed you immediately jumped to number 2, it's not about you, and number 4, do the right thing and fear no man. I heard a lot of people nodding or little grunts from the audience when we brought up boot camp or mentioned TBS and places were mentioned. One of the things always taught to Marines at these various schools is everything's got to get boiled down to 3 to 5 points. Because when it's 3 a.m. and you're being rained on and you're writing something in a notebook, you're never going to remember more than the first 3 or 5 things you put down. So having mentioned those two, or do you have a different list, what would you say are your 3 to 4 most important maxims? If someone had to have, 3 or 4 things like that, young sergeant in the mud and the rain at 3 a.m. that they have to remember or should remember coming out of here on leadership, what would those 3 to 4 be?
Well, the first maxim in the book, I think, is probably the most important, right? And again, it's a direct lift. We're going way back now to the Oracle at Delphi, right? And that's know thyself. Why do I put that up front? Well, I think it's incredibly important, right, as a leader that you have an understanding of your own emotions. How can you be in charge of, right, and be responsible for managing the emotions of other people if you don't have an appreciation of your own, right? So I put that first maxim in there to give everybody the opportunity, right, to do some introspection, right, to calibrate their moral compass, and to declare their purpose. Now, if I could flesh out any maxim in the book, I would do that. But as these maxims are organized, I did a lot of research, as you mentioned, for each one of these things. I went back and I read contemporary authors, a lot of classics, and every book I read trying to pull this manuscript together, the next book I found in the bibliography of the work cited from the previous one. So that taproot took me all the way back to a lot of the ancient philosophers and stuff, and realized that none of this stuff is new, right? All of this stuff has just been repackaged. You read Xenophon and you see, there's a Xenophon, actually introduced, or many of these maxims in there can be taken back to him as probably the first leader, the general back in ancient Greece, who led, not by fear and intimidation, but by through consensus. The next one I would say in there is, again, a lift from our 26th president, Teddy Roosevelt, and that's Marines don't care how much you know, but they'll know how much you care. And we have in the Marine Corps you're taught, well, you have 14 leadership traits and 11 leadership principles. I always call on, my students and ask them, well, which one's missing? And my argument is that my premise is that what's missing is love, right? That's I think is the missing leadership attribute, right? As General Zinni says, if you personify all 14 of those lessons, right, all those leadership traits, you'll be a good person, but you might not necessarily be a good leader. But if your Marines think that you love them, that you truly care about them, there's absolutely nothing that they won't do for the organization. Now notice I didn't say for you, right, because we already established that's the second maxim. It's not about you, but being able to truly care. So in the book, again, I didn't try to give anybody some quick tricks or ploys, but I did want to give them some practical ways that they could actually communicate to their Marines that they truly care about them. And of course, the best way to do that is to get to know them, right? But I gave them some practical tips on how they could actually, ask some penetrating questions to get to know their Marines, but also to connect with them. If I was to say what was my most powerful tool, probably for the front of the book, to answer your first question, would be what I refer to as my letter bombs. Now, the letter bomb has nothing to do with that crazy guy who lived up in Montana, right? But my letter bombs, where's Shannon at? Where's my Adge? All right, Shannon, you're going to help me out. So we're going to role play this one out a little bit. So when I was a battalion commander, my sergeant major and I would walk around and I would have my green notebook in my hand, and we'd go out and we'd find someone who was just busting their butt down there at the tank ramp or down there at the gun park, and we'd see Canavero. And I don't know what Canavero was doing, but Canavero, which is whatever it was, just drew my attention. I documented it in the book. And that evening, I'd come back and I'd scream Adge, right? So my adjutant would come in there and I'd say, hey, Shannon, I need you to pull the red on Canavero. For those not familiar with the military jargon and acronyms here, the red is the record of emergency data. So I'd have the address and phone number of Mrs. and Mrs. Canavero. And I would take a couple of minutes that night, and I'd just write a quick note to, Keith's parents before I went home that night, and I'd say, Dear Mr. and Mrs. Canavero, my name's Tom Gordon. I'm the CO of 1st Tank Battalion. I just want to take a couple of minutes to tell you how incredibly impressed I am with your son, Keith. And a couple of whatever it was to kind of personalize it a little bit, right? And with this note, please accept my gratitude for your support, because I know Keith would not be the Marine he is today without your continued support. So from me to you, thank you very much. Now, I called it a letter bomb because it had a 96-hour fuse. You dropped it in the mail, right? It would take 48 hours for that letter to get to Mr. and Mrs. Canavero. It would take another 24 hours for Mr. Canavero to actually read the letter and pick up the phone and call Keith. Well, my sergeant major and I would always set a little calendar reminder on our BlackBerry or whatever to go down to the tank park or to the gun park, on that fourth day. And I swear, every time, whatever it was that Canavero was doing 4 days ago, he's now doing it 10 times faster, 10 times better, right? And he's pulling everyone with him. And the only one who knows about that, right, well, are Canavero and I, right? It was just a way to communicate to our Marines that, you know what, well, why was Canavero busting his butt, right? Now, Canavero would never say he was busting his butt because he was trying to get someone's attention, right? He would completely deny that. But he was. And I can prove the inverse, right? You want to make a Marine stop? You want to make a soldier stop, high-performing soldier, high-performing Marine stop doing what they're doing? It's easy. All you have to do is nothing, right? Why should I bust my butt if no one's going to pay attention, right? The other reason why is most Marines joined the Marine Corps because they wanted to make someone proud, right? They wanted to make someone proud, right? So I took what Canavero was doing, matched it up with why he was doing, took a little bit of recognition, and what did it cost me? 5 minutes and 39 cents. I say 39 cents, but if I'm going to be honest, right, I actually never paid for the stamp. I always considered it official mail, and I just ran it through the meter, right? So that's just a great tool. And there's several other ones in there for junior leaders that they could use for both good circumstances and difficult circumstances. And the last one I would say is the last maxim in the book, all right? That's basically simply states that, hey, if the boss isn't having fun, no one's having fun, right? So if you're not having a good time, if you don't really enjoy what you're doing, go and do something else, right? But don't continue to command. Marines deserve better than that. Soldiers deserve better than that. But also in that maxim about happiness and success, I kind of demystify that a little bit, right? Because if you're trying to pursue your passion, the truth is it's not always going to be fun, right? That's actually what the word means. It means to suffer. But so if you're trying to chase success, if you're trying to chase that next promotion, if you're trying to chase that next billet, right? You're never going to be truly satisfied. Me, and my lesson in that last how I try to close out the book is to find something of significance to do. And that's why my wife and I are so happy right now, is I couldn't imagine doing anything more significant than I'm doing right now in the second career than educating and developing principal leaders.
You mentioned the instance where you had to, relieve an officer who was under you, drawing on the lessons you had before on the officer you didn't relieve. This actually resonated with one of the members of our audience who had to let 6 people go from their team at work today, and obviously creating a lot of stress both for themselves and within their organization. What leadership advice would you offer to them on helping rally a team after suffering a loss to get the people who are still there back on track, to be committed to the team rather than just worrying, am I the next person who's going to get struck?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's that circle of trust, right? Simon Sinek writes an awful lot about it. We're sitting here in San Francisco, and we get that iconic that Golden Gate Bridge out there. Did anyone ever read the story about how they built that bridge and the problems that they were having with that bridge? And so many of the iron workers, falling to their death, and it was just the bridge was constantly behind in it was overruns, et cetera. And they had new management come in there, and they put a safety net up, right? They put a safety net up, and all it took was having that safety net out there so the workers felt safe and secure. And then all of a sudden production it picked up, and they were able to rapidly complete the bridge. So a huge part of what we do, right, as leaders is just remove that fear of the unknown and that anxiety. The best way to do it, however, is to be candid, as candid as possible. had to go through the same thing ourselves. It's a very difficult time coming out of the pandemic. The Citadel's had a couple of very difficult years in that pandemic. We've had low matriculation numbers, had some high attrition, and then of course we have skyrocketing inflation, and we have a fixed budget. So we had to really tighten up our belt. What would I tell that leader? Well, first and foremost, I tried, just as I did when I was trying to cut the budget at the Citadel, was you have to be candid with people. You know, if people know that if you're being truthful with them, right? If then they'll trust you, right? As I like to say, trust isn't earned, mistrust is earned. Trust is extended. So you have to be able to bring them into it, but then be candid with them and let them know that you value their service. That would be the best advice I could give.
Another related question from the audience. You've talked a couple times already about how to deal with stress and get high performance out of your subordinates. But what about how can you continue to be a good leader when the person who's under stress or facing adversity is yourself? Either because of something external to your job or the person in the first question who was, feeling bad and feeling stress regarding what they had to do and letting people go. What happens when someone won't pull you out to take that walk in the desert to try and fix you like others were? What are the leadership tools you can use to try and fix yourself and keep yourself on track when you're the one who needs help?
A big part of what I do at the Citadel is not just developing character and virtue, but it's also building resiliency and resolve. And how do you build resiliency? How do you build resolve? Well, the simple answer is you give a young person some adversity, you allow them to overcome that adversity, wash, rinse, and repeat. The more complex answer to that, though, is you have to give them some tools in their toolbox. And probably, as I told you, going back and doing some research on this book, I've really became enthralled with the Stoics, right? I discovered, James Stockdale, who actually discovered the Stoics here, right next door up there at Hoover. The Navy sent him as a squadron commander before he deployed to Vietnam to come here and learn about engineering, and he found Stoicism by a guy by the name of Reinhardt there at Stanford. And the lesson that Stockdale learned from reading Epictetus and some of the other Stoics was what he called the dichotomy of control. And this really resonates with me, and I think it should resonate with all leaders. And it's a fancy way of saying the Serenity Prayer, right? Being able to determine what's in your control and what's not in your control. And what Stockdale would say is the invincible man is the person who can't be dismayed by things that are not within his control. So, as you know, this man spent 7.5 years as a prisoner in the Hanoi Hilton, was exposed to horrific torture and abuse. But he was able to rally all of his soldiers, all of his airmen, all the special operators that were there and lead through and have them, repatriate with honor. And how he was able to do that was by being able to instill some of these Stoic virtues in there. The first one, as I said, was a dichotomy of control. The next one would be, cognitive distancing. Being able to kind of step back and, and see the problem in the round, and put some distance between you and the problem. I've had some very stressful jobs throughout my time in the Marine Corps. So I'm a recovering MILSEC. Did that for 27 months. But what I would need to do during those times is I would actually do a lot of reflection. Think about what was in my control, what wasn't in my control, and then just have that quiet time. You have to have that quiet time. You have to be able to compartmentalize and put things in the box, because the worst thing you can do is bring the work box home into the family box. So I would spend some time just making sure I was able to compartmentalize that as much as I could.
The next question I'm going to say is sort of the flip side of the same coin. What happens when you have a problem as a leader? You know what the problem is. You yourself are not facing adversity, but you don't have the authority or the power to fix the problem. You had the ability as a commander in certain cases to relieve subordinates under you. People in different jobs around the civilian world don't necessarily have that in all cases, even if they're in a leadership role. What do you do when the problem is staring you at the face, but they didn't you are not given the tool to fix that problem. The nail's there, but they won't let you hold the hammer.
One of my bosses that I've had, an aviator, Smoke Beidler, taught me a tremendous amount. General Beidler, both when he was the J5 at CENTCOM, when I was the MARCENT G3, but also more when he was the MEF commander. And whenever you would take General Beidler, an order, he would spend an inordinate amount of time on the references. Now, the rest of us know who've been planners, basically, where do we get the references? Well, that was from the last order we had, right? Right. That was a cut and paste and a copy. We just make sure that they were up to date. But he would spend a tremendous amount of time on the references of whatever the order was that he was about to sign. And the reason why he was doing that is because he wanted to make sure that whatever decision he made, he had the authority to make, right? Because that is one mistake that you cannot recover from as a commander, and that's making a decision for something that you don't have the authority to do, right? So first and foremost, you actually need to know, that's that self-awareness thing, know what's in your power and what's not in your power. And then it comes to leading up, right? I think that's the ability to be able to communicate up to your boss and be able to understand what your boss's boss is going to make sure that you can actually get the authority, or to make sure that your boss sees what needs to be done. It can be extremely difficult depending on the individuals you're working for. I've worked for some very, very challenging bosses in that regard, but being able to communicate that stuff up, and the best way to do that I've always found is by being able to communicate risk, right? That's what we do. As I mentioned before, my job is to underwrite the risk of well-intentioned failure, but being able to communicate, all commanders in the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Army see life through the prism of risk. That's our job. So if you can articulate that to the boss as to what the risk is of not doing something, right? Sometimes that's probably the best way to actually be able to lead up and get that decision.
Have one or two more questions here on the leadership, and then we'll shift gears to some of the character, the intangibles. Sure. You mentioned that commanding through intimidation is not a successful strategy, but obviously anyone who has served in the military, in particular the Marine Corps, knows that no Marine Corps officer or Marine Corps senior enlisted has ever been mistaken for a comedian or Norm at the bar and Cheers or something like that. How do you balance professionalism and being respected with I want to say friendliness, but the approachability, or I'm searching for an antonym to intimidation, not being the martinet that beats people down to try and get success or tries to drag them somewhere, but still being a person who, when walking in front as a leader, people see them as standing upright and not just, here's my pal with his arm around me. And sub-question to that, with your experience leading, cadets at the Citadel, is there any change in that for the current generation? There's lots of different opinions on, generation, Z, and, even worse, the millennials and the old rigmarole. The Marine Corps tradition or military tradition is you go to boot camp, you get yelled at, screamed at, it's maximum intimidation at the start. Is that still a successful strategy with the youth of today?
No. But there were several questions in there, and let me try to take them in order if I could. I'll actually refer back to one of the maxims in my book, and that's about the disease to please. If you were to ask me what is the most common mistake that I've seen young leaders exhibit once they hit the operating forces, is just that, right? The disease to please. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, they try to be liked, right? And that's the thing that's associated probably with this generation more than any other generation, and we can talk about social media and dopamine and all that stuff, right? But we all want to be liked, right? We all want to be liked. But those of us who have been around the block a couple of times know that when you go into an organization trying to be liked, trying to curry favor, right, with your subordinates, you actually have the exact opposite result, right? You end up becoming an object of ridicule, right? You lose trust and confidence of the very people that you're trying to court. We're taught at TBS, right, that we want to be respected, not liked. But we all seek that affirmation deep down inside, right? So how do you balance that? Well, you did mention humor, right? And I'll tell you, I think humor is a great leadership tool, right? But it has to be used wisely. It has to be used with a high degree of emotional intelligence, right? But it is a great lubricant. You know, we got a lot of ill at ease right now facing the services, and probably the most challenging one, and we were just talking about it with Shannon and I were talking about it before we started this conversation about, you know, suicide in the services. You know, there's one organization that right now has shown, you know, almost 100% immunity to the plague of suicide. And if, you know who that is? It's the Royal Marines. It's the British Royal Marines. Suicide is practically non-existent in their ranks. But I attribute that to their leadership philosophy, which is cheer in the face of adversity. And if you've ever been around some Royal Marines, right, you know that they have some very off-colored humor, right? It's that gallows humor, it's that morose humor, it's the poor timing of their jokes that actually make them resonate with Marines, right? Situations go into complete crap, you know, Andy Watkins is going to come in and just say something completely inappropriate and off color, right? But you know what? His Marines loved him, and it resonated with them. So I think I'm trying to get, you know, giving it back to you in the round there, Phillip. But yeah, you don't want to be joking. You don't be afraid to joke with your Marines. I think humor can be an effective leadership tool, but just so long as you make sure that you do it with a high degree of emotional intelligence, and two, understand where the boundaries are, right? And especially, I wouldn't advocate doing that as a junior Marine. You know, I would not. That would not be a tool that I would try to employ as a young second lieutenant. It would usually probably blow up in your face.
So as I mentioned, shifting gears a little bit to some of the bigger issues. Character, I think it was a Maxim 46. Talent can get you to the top, but character keeps you there, right? Character and integrity are obviously a theme throughout everything in your book and what you've been talking about tonight. And the first question is, can integrity and character be taught, or is it pre-wired? Can you actually make people better in the sense of character, or are they pretty much going to come to you with either, you know, the switch in the right position or not?
Well, yeah, I take a more classical definition of character, right? So if you go back, the ancient Greek word for character was actually charasein, which meant to engrave or to imprint. And that gave the Greek noun character, right, which is what we think of today as a symbol. Of course, character is a homonym, right? It's multiple words with the same pronunciation, spelling, but entirely different meanings. But they come together. So the Greeks would use charasein, right? They would engrave their coins, their currency, with symbols of images to give them credibility. Well, today, of course, character means both, you know, the emblem, the character or the symbol, right? But it also means the moral integrity of an individual, right? I go back to the classic definition of it, though, and I think your character is defined by your personal choices, right? It takes form in that inner confrontation between your internal weaknesses and trying to do the right thing. And if repeated over time, those things become habits, you know, a disposition to do the right thing. So, yeah, I think giving young people the opportunity to lead, right? Giving them the opportunity to, because I wrote a book on leadership, but let's be honest, the best way to develop leaders is by doing it. It's not by reading. I try to synthesize, you know, as much as I could in the book, the experiences of others, so that a junior leader, you know, doesn't have to start from the beginning, right? They can rely on these other things. Some of my best mentors that I had in writing this book were known to me only by the written word, right? Seneca said that, you know, if you want to have a communication with the dead, go to the library, right? Go pick up some of these great books. So no, I truly believe that the character can be taught, and it's taught by the books that you read, it's taught by the mentorship that you receive, and it's most importantly taught by the leadership opportunities that you're given.
Your last assignment on active duty was as commander of the Command and Staff School. So you were teaching, you know, Marines who were, you know, captains, you know, 8, 9 years in. So people, again, I mentioned, you know, the millennial generation, people who their entire adult life or maybe in their entire memories were the post 9/11 world, right? Mm-hmm. And then right now you're as the Commandant of the Citadel dealing with people who are, you know, were born in some cases well after 9/11. So you sort of are seeing a cross-section of the part of society that a lot of people are talking about when they talk about, there's obviously a lot of malaise in our country across all, aspects of society in some ways. You mentioned, some of the politics and everything the past couple of years, which we don't have to get into the politics. But looking at, seeing people bookending sort of that generation, which, maybe unfairly, just based on their point in time, are the focus, a lot of the concerns about, culture and how our society is developing and going. What can you tell us about those future leaders? What do you see in them that is either the same or different as, may have been when you and I were serving?
I have a lot of, I have some short-term pessimism and a lot of long-term optimism for the future. I think that this up-and-coming generation has tremendous promise, but we have to be honest with ourselves about how we're basically right now educating and developing these future leaders. Tailing back a little bit to your previous question, and then I'll take it forward, is if you think about it today in society, we've removed a lot of the things that actually developed character for us, right? And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to restore it. I call it, it's the 4 R's, right? So today, this generation, well, they risk too little, and that's not their fault, right? It's ours. It's our generation was the one that pulled the jungle gyms off the playgrounds because they were too dangerous and put everyone in a bicycle helmet, right? The result was we have a generation who's been taught that risk is bad and not to dare. We were the generation that came up with the participation trophies, right? So we reward too quickly, and we reward mediocrity without respect for the consequences of what that could entail, right? We've removed rigor, right? Think about it. Now even fast food is too onerous of a chore, right? You just pick up the app and Uber Eats will make someone else sit in the Chick-fil-A drive-through line. What probably concerns me most is who we revere. Gone are the Superman, the heroes of the greatest generation. Who's this generation's heroes? Well, they have Iron Man. Who's Iron Man? Well, he's a narcissistic rich kid with a drinking problem. This is, we got to be really careful about who we're presenting up as heroes. Quite frankly, the anti-hero today is not the villain in the story. They're actually the heroes in the story. So I think we need to be conscious of this as we're developing it, but a big maxim there in my book is that people do what people see. So if I could go back in reverse order, we need to actually be putting examples to emulate up in front of the youth going forward right now. Alfred Whiteside, he was a British economist and educator. He said, "A moral education is impossible without the habitual examples of greatness." We got greatness over in Ukraine right now, right? We can see Zelensky over there, but we need to have, where are the American examples right now to put in front of them? I said, we got to put some rigor back into society. I said, you want to build character? Do hard things. Do hard things. I like to say that growth and comfort can never coexist. That's at the Citadel, I present myself as the anti-recruiter. I don't try to soft sell at the young men and women. I want them to know that if you come there, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be rigorous. It's going to be demanding, because that's how you build character. Seneca said that true character can't be revealed without adversity, and I agree to that. And then, it goes back to risk, right? Being able to push down and have some confidence in them. I've put an anti-helicopter parent zone around the Citadel, right? They're adults, and I'm going to allow them to go out there and make some mistakes and learn from those mistakes, because that's how they're going to build their character going forward. But I am also extremely optimistic for this group, because they don't have the baggage that we do, right? They are curious, right? They're not afraid to challenge the status quo, and they have access to incredible information. We just need to make sure that we're giving them, the opportunity to actually go forward and to dare and to lead and to make mistakes, right? We need to allow them to fail, right? And we need to allow them to fail fast so they continue to learn and iterate and develop. That's how we're going to fix this problem. That's how we're going to restore character.
We are almost out of time. As several people have mentioned, it's been fantastic to be back here in person doing this again. And one of the signs of that is all of the questions that I received that I wasn't able to get to because of time tonight. So I want to thank everyone in the audience for coming out and helping breathe a little bit of life back into our club and participating in these events tonight. Before we wrap up, though, I do have one last question. Who is Maxim number 44 about? And can you please clearly enunciate and phonetically spell their last name?
Thanks,
I hope I was able to add humor at the appropriate time, as you said. Once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Colonel Gordon, for coming out tonight and sharing this wisdom with us tonight. We really appreciate you having you, and I hope everyone enjoyed this evening as I did. And once again, thank you for coming back and making our club the living institution that it aims to be.
Hey, thanks, Phillip, very much. Thank you, General Rocco.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation from Marines Memorial Association and Foundation. To learn more about the organization, visit marinesmemorial.org.